Working in a roadside snack bar in the middle of the night was never something quiet, but that night something happened that I never forgot. The movement was practically zero, and I took advantage of the silence to clean the counter and organize some things. That's when I looked up at the glass window in front, I clearly noticed the silhouette of a man standing behind me. My heart shot at the time. The figure was tall, motionless, and seemed to watch me in silence. I immediately came to see who was there, but the hall was completely empty. The tables are all clean, the chairs pushed inside, no doors open. But when I looked back at the reflection on the window, the silhouette was still there, standing exactly in the same place. I didn't react, trying to understand how that was possible. I even looked at the floor and the corners of the snack bar, looking for some detail that justified the shadow on the glass. But there was nothing that could create that clear reflection. The figure seemed too real, as if someone was really standing right behind me. With my breathing accelerated, I decided to walk to the back of the hall, passing by each table, convinced that I would find someone hidden. But the place remained completely empty. The silence of the dawn, broken only by the distant sound of the road, only made the scene even more disturbing. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was still there, motionless, as if waiting for me. At this point, my hands were already shaking. I decided to do a test. I moved slowly to the side, and in the reflection I could see my body following the movement normally. But the silhouette behind me didn't mote. She remained firm, still, as if she were stuck to that point of the glass. It was at that moment that I realized that it was not just a common reflex. I ran to the front door and opened it hard, looking at the snack bar parking lot. It was completely empty, lit only by the lampposts. No cars, no people, nothing that justified that presence. I closed the door quickly, my heart racing, and turned my eyes once again to the window. The figure was still there, exactly the same way, as if it hadn't given me a second of rest. I went back behind the counter and stared at the window, trying to understand what I was seeing. The figure had no defined traits, but it was impossible to deny that it looked like a man, standing right behind me. The detail that left me most shocked was when I realized that, even without moving my head, the reflex seemed slightly closer than before, as if I had advanced a few steps. Not knowing what to do, I took the phone from the snack bar and thought about calling the manager, but I thought he wouldn't believe anything I was going through. I stayed a few seconds with the phone in my hand, until I heard a noise of a chair dragging coming from the salon. I dropped the phone and ran to check, but the chairs were all in place. I looked back at the window, and this time the reflection was gone. The relief didn't last long, because seconds later I felt a current of cold air passing behind me, as if someone had just walked through the hall. I turned in all directions, but I didn't see anything. The only thing that accompanied me was the constant noise of the clock hanging on the wall, each tick echoing too loud in that suffocating silence. I tried to continue the shift pretending that nothing had happened, but my attention was stuck to the glass. I couldn't stop looking, hoping to see the silhouette appear again. And the more minutes passed, the more the feeling that there was someone with me became unbearable, even if my eyes didn't find anyone in there. When the clock struck 4 in the morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I closed the cash register before the time and stayed outside, in the cold, waiting for the colleague from the next shift to arrive. I couldn't explain what I had seen, but I knew it wasn't imagination. The reflection in the window was as clear as mine, and the detail of him not moving along with me convinced me that it wasn't just a play of light. To this day, whenever I work in the early morning shift, I avoid looking at that window for a long time. I still feel like at any moment I could see that silhouette standing behind me again. And you, would you have the courage to continue alone in a deserted snack bar after noticing a reflection that shouldn't be there? I had left on a long car trip, and already around midnight, I stopped at a roadside snack bar to rest a little. The place was almost empty, only with the attendant behind the counter and a customer sitting at a table near the window. I ordered a coffee and a snack, and the attendant went to prepare while I sat down. The environment was quiet, only with the weak sound of the plate heating up. After a few minutes, I decided to go to the bathroom to wash my face. I didn't stay in there for more than 3 or 4 minutes, and when I returned to the salon, I had an immediate shock. The customer was no longer at the table, the attendant was not behind the counter, and the entire snack bar seemed completely empty. The detail that gave me goosebumps was that the plate was still on, and the food kept heating up, as if it had been suddenly abandoned. I stood at the bathroom door, trying to understand what was happening. I called out loud, hoping that the attendant would appear from the kitchen or that the customer had gone to the parking lot. But no one answered. The silence was so great that I could only hear the hiss of the plate and the hum of the fluorescent light on the ceiling. I walked to the counter and looked over. The cup I had ordered was there, full of steaming coffee, as if it had just been served. Next to it, the cheese bread was still being toasted, exhaling the smell of butter. Everything seemed in order, except for the fact that there was no one there to attend me. The scene gave the impression that people had simply disappeared in the middle of a common action. I looked at the table where the other customer was sitting and realized that his cup was still half full, with the coffee cooling down. The bench was still tight, as if he had just got up. There were no collected dishes, no sign that he had finished the meal. It was as if he had suddenly gotten up and disappeared. I decided to go to the door to see if there was anyone outside, but the parking lot was completely empty. No car besides mine, no movement on the silent road. I went back inside with a tightness in my stomach, because it was impossible that two people had simply disappeared without leaving a trace in such a short time. I tried to open the door that led to the kitchen, hoping to find the attendant, but the space was also empty. Pots were still on the fire, the time clock marked the exact time, and even his cell phone was left on top of the sink. The feeling was that everyone had left in a hurry, but there was no reason for that. The silence in that environment made me even more nervous. I went back to the hall and sat for a few minutes, trying to decide whether to wait or leave. But the longer I was, the more uncomfortable I felt. The snack bar looked different, as if it was heavy, as if the air had suddenly become dense. I looked at the entrance door, waiting for someone to show up, but nothing happened. I took my cell phone and tried to call the snack bar number that appeared on Google, but the call only rang and no one answered. The strangest thing was that, from where I was, I could see the landline on the counter, and it didn't ring. It was as if the connection didn't exist in there. This made me even more suspicious, and the idea of staying alone in that place began to look worse and worse. I got up and decided to take one last look before leaving. I went through the bathroom corridor and the living room again, observing every detail, but nothing had changed. The lights were still on, the plate still squeaked with the food on top, and the two coffees remained intact. Everything seemed frozen in time, as if someone had paused the scene and left only me to watch. At this point, it no longer made sense to try to wait any longer. I took my car key and walked to the door with the feeling that I was being followed. Before leaving, I looked for the last time at the front glass of the snack bar. It was then that, in the reflection, I had the impression of seeing someone standing behind the counter, motionless, watching me. I came right away, but the space was still empty as before. That was enough to make me go through the door without thinking twice. I got into the car and started the fast engine, leaving there in a few seconds. When I looked through the rearview mirror, the snack bar was still lit, but the sight made me uncomfortable, as if something was waiting for me if I decided to come back. I continued driving for a few kilometers, but I couldn't calm down. The scene of the empty snack bar, with the food still being prepared and the coffees untouched, seemed impossible to forget. I tried to find a logical explanation, but nothing fit. The customer, the attendant, everyone had simply disappeared without leaving a trace, as if they had never been there. To this day, I don't know what I saw that morning. Whenever I pass by roadside snack bars, I remember the strange feeling of being stuck in a place frozen in time. Maybe I'll never find out what happened, but the memory of that reflection behind the counter still haunts me. And you, would you have the courage to continue in an empty place where people suddenly disappear, leaving everything behind? Working late was never a problem for me, but that specific night something made me uncomfortable in a way I can't explain. I was closing the diner together with another colleague, around 2 in the morning, when I looked distractedly through the front window. On the other side of the parking lot, standing right at the edge of the lighting of the poles, there was a motionless man looking directly inside. He didn't move, he didn't take a single step. He just stayed there, as if he was watching our every move inside the restaurant. My heart raced at the time, but I tried to stay calm. I waited about 10 minutes before calling my colleague, wanting to make sure it wasn't an impression. But when I finally asked him to look, the man was no longer there. My colleague laughed and said I was probably tired, but I knew I hadn't imagined. The image was too clear, a tall man standing still, as if he had all the time in the world to watch us. I tried to ignore it and continued to help organize the tables, but the feeling of being watched did not leave me alone. Every time I passed by the window, my body locked, hoping to see him again. Already near the time to close, When we turned off half of the lights and started counting the cash register, I glanced out once again. That's when I saw the same silhouette, now half hidden behind the deactivated gas pump that was on the side of the parking lot. He didn't move, he was just there, motionless, as if he had approached without anyone noticing. The shock was so great that I dropped the cloth I was holding and called my colleague again. He went to the window with me, but, as before, there was no one when he looked. The gas pump was there, covered in rust, with nothing around. He said that probably some hiker had passed and traveled, but something inside me knew it wasn't that. The silhouette hadn't moved like a normal person. It was as if it had simply appeared there. The strangest thing is that we didn't hear footsteps, not a car coming or leaving, nothing that indicated movement in the parking lot. And yet, I had clearly seen someone standing, in the darkness, watching the inside of the diner. I tried to disguise my nervousness, but every minute that passed until it was time to leave seemed to drag on, with the constant feeling that he was still around. When we finally finished the closure and started to put things away, I avoided looking out again as much as possible. But it was impossible to ignore the reflection of the glass, and with every movement of mine it seemed that something was projecting in the darkness. Even my colleague, who used to be quiet, began to comment that the environment was too heavy, as if the air had suddenly become dense. We took our bags and turned off the last lights, leaving only the lighting of the sign on. The moment I opened the door to leave, I felt as if someone was standing right on the edge of the parking lot, watching us. I looked quickly at the gas pump, and I swear I saw a figure move behind it, as if it was hiding on purpose. My colleague tried to calm me down, telling me to go straight to the car, but I couldn't stop looking in that direction. We walked fast through the silent parking lot, and at every step I felt my eyes being pulled to the gas pump. I even heard a slight sound, like gravel being stepped on, but when I turned my head I saw nothing but darkness. We got in the car and locked the doors immediately. While he was starting the engine, I looked through the rear window, and for a second, I had the impression of seeing the silhouette again, standing next to the pump, watching. The car left there, and the figure was swallowed by the darkness. Even so, the feeling that I was still being watched remained with me all the way back home. The next morning, I tried to tell the story to other diner colleagues, but no one took it seriously. They said it was probably just some stranger who passed by the road and decided to stop out of curiosity. But I knew it wasn't that. The way the silhouette appeared and disappeared without leaving traces did not seem like something common. That night was engraved in my memory as one of the strangest I've ever lived there. To this day, whenever I pass through the empty parking lot when it's time to close, I feel that same chill in my back. I avoid looking at the gas pump, as if I were afraid of seeing again the same still figure watching me. And you, would you have the courage to cross a deserted parking lot at 2 in the morning, knowing that a silhouette may be waiting in the darkness? Working in a 24-hour snack bar was never exactly easy, but that morning the silence was even greater than usual. I was alone, organizing the orders on the counter, when I heard the doorbell ring. The sound was unmistakable, indicating that someone had just entered. I immediately looked at the entrance, but there was no one there. I thought maybe it was some electrical problem, since the doorbell was old, so I went back to work trying not to think too much. But a few minutes later, the sound played again. This time, not just once, it was 3 touches in a row, as if someone had opened and closed the door quickly. I looked again, and to my amazement, the door hadn't moved even an inch. My heart accelerated at the time, and I let go of what I was doing to check closely. I walked to the door and pulled hard, but it was locked as always. The icy dawn wind came in when I opened it to check the parking lot, and there was no one around. Not even cars passing on the road. Everything was completely empty and silent. I closed it and locked it again, trying to convince myself that it could be some defect in the doorbell system. But deep down I knew it wasn't that. The sound had been too perfect, just like what I hear every time a customer comes in. It was as if someone invisible had crossed the door and sat somewhere in the hall. I went back to the counter, but I couldn't take my eyes off the reflection of the glass. The living room was empty, each table perfectly arranged, and yet the feeling was that I was not alone. I started to notice any small noise. The pop of the wood, the hum of the lamps, even the sound of the coffee maker seemed louder than usual. I just hoped the doorbell wouldn't ring again. But a few minutes later, it happened again. A single touch, dry, that echoed through the quiet environment. I was standing facing the door at the exact moment I heard the sound, and even so the door didn't move. It was at that moment that I realized that it couldn't be a defect. It was as if someone was forcing the entrance on purpose, just to leave me on alert. I took my cell phone and thought about calling the manager, but I gave up at the same moment. What would I say? That the doorbell was ringing by itself? It would seem like a silly excuse from someone tired of the dawn shift. I then decided to continue working, but with each new order I organized, my gaze returned to the door, hoping to hear the sound again. And it didn't take long. 2 more quick touches echoed, followed by a suffocating silence. The difference is that this time I felt a strong chill, as if there was someone standing in the hall, right behind me. I came right away, but the tables were all still empty. Still, I had the clear feeling that if I called out loud, someone would answer. The rest of the shift was torture. The doorbell didn't ring anymore, but I couldn't relax even for a minute. I kept looking at each table, as if at any moment I was going to see someone sitting there. The silence of the dawn mixed with that inexplicable detail made me feel that there was something inside the snack bar with me, even if my eyes said otherwise. Since that night, whenever I work alone, I leave the door ajar, just to convince myself that there are no tricks going on. But the memory of those touches continues to bother me to this day. And you, would you have the courage to be alone in an empty place listening to the doorbell ring, even though you see that no one came in? A colleague and I worked in the early morning shift in a roadside snack bar. We almost never received large orders at this time, so we were surprised when, around 3 in the morning, the phone rang. The male voice on the other side ordered 4 burgers and 3 milkshakes to go. I thought it was weird, but we wrote it down and started preparing everything. When the food was ready, we packed it properly and left it on the counter, waiting for someone to come and get it. But no one showed up. We waited about 30 minutes, then a whole hour, and nothing. The strangest thing is that the road was deserted, no cars stood, and we didn't receive any cancellation calls. The order was left there, cooling down, without an owner. We were about to throw everything away when the phone rang again. It was the same voice, calm and without emotion, asking for exactly the same request, for burgers and 3 milkshakes. My colleague and I looked at each other without knowing what to say. She even commented in a joking tone that it could be some prank, but deep down neither of them laughed. The coincidence was too strange to be just that. Even so, we started to prepare everything again. The noise of the plate filled the silence of the dawn, and every minute that passed the tension only increased. We assembled the burgers, whipped the milkshakes, packed everything and put it again on the counter, waiting for someone to show up. But, just like the first time, no one came to pick it up. The clock was already almost 5 in the morning, and both the first and second order were untouched on the counter. My colleague decided to call back to the number that had appeared on the identifier, but it was always in the mailbox. This only made everything weirder, because it meant that someone could call us, but we couldn't return the call. We sat at one of the front tables to rest, but I couldn't stop looking at the deserted road outside. There was no passing car, no movement that justified 2 calls in a row asking for exactly the same thing. It was as if someone just wanted to keep us busy that morning, without ever showing up. My colleague even suggested that maybe it was someone testing if we were open, but that didn't make sense. The phone was not used by almost anyone, and for someone to call at 3 in the morning of that empty road, it had to be on purpose. The worst was when I looked at the counter and had the impression that one of the milkshake glasses was a little out of place. I asked if she had moved, and she swore she hadn't touched anything. The environment got heavy after that. The clock seemed to take a long time to move, and every splash of the plate or noise from the refrigerator made me on alert. We were waiting for any car to pull over, any sign of movement, but the parking lot was still completely empty. It was as if we were trapped in an endless wait, surrounded by food that would never have an owner. When the sun finally began to rise, we looked at the counter, and the 2 orders were still there, intact. No explanation, no customer, nothing. It was as if those calls had never happened. To this day I clearly remember the voice calmly asking for hamburgers and milkshakes, as if it were a routine, but without ever intending to get them. Since that morning, whenever the phone rings at dawn, I feel a chill before answering. We never received the same request again, but the memory of that heavy silence while we waited continues to bother me. And you, would you have the courage to answer a call at 3 in the morning and prepare food for a customer who never shows up? I had been on the road for hours, and after midnight, I decided to stop at a roadside snack bar in Nevada to have a coffee and stretch my legs. The place seemed common at first glance, illuminated by yellowish lamps and with that smell of fat mixed with coffee that every snack bar has. The waiter came to my table quickly, but his way made me uncomfortable from the beginning. While writing down my request, he didn't take his eyes off me. It wasn't that automatic look of those who work tired. It was fixed, intense, as if I were trying to record every detail of my face. At the back of the hall, 2 customers were talking quietly, but as soon as I realized, they stopped talking and started staring at me too. The silence that followed was so strange that even the noise of the pen scratching the paper seemed too loud. I decided not to extend my stay there. I drank a sip of water while I waited and stared out of the corner of my eye at the 2 customers. They didn't look away, they remained motionless, as if they were waiting for some reaction from me. The waiter, in turn, was still standing next to him, holding the notepad, but still staring at me almost without blinking. When the coffee arrived, I drank it as fast as I could. The silence in the place was suffocating, and it seemed that each movement of mine was accompanied by 3 pairs of eyes. I could barely enjoy the drink. I just wanted to finish it soon and get out of there. I took some folded notes in my pocket, left them on the table, and waved them to the waiter, who didn't answer anything, just kept looking as before. I left the snack bar trying to act naturally, but inside I only thought about turning on the truck and taking the road back as soon as possible. The parking lot was empty, and the hot wind of the dawn made the silence even heavier. I entered the cabin, closed the door, and started the engine, feeling an immediate relief for being away from those strange looks. But when I started maneuvering to get out, I couldn't resist taking one last look through the rearview mirror. It was at that moment that my heart raced. The waiter and the 2 customers were standing at the door of the snack bar, aligned, motionless, just watching my truck move away. No gesture, no movement, just those fixed eyes following me to the road. The scene was engraved in my mind. Even after turning the curve and losing the sight of the snack bar, I still had the feeling that those 3 kept watching me, as if their eyes crossed the darkness of the road. I tried to convince myself that it was just paranoia caused by fatigue, but deep down I knew there was something wrong with that place. I drove for a few kilometers in silence, the radio off, only listening to the constant noise of the engine. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget their synchronized gaze, all stopped at the door at the same time. It was as if they weren't just curious strangers, but people who expected something from me, something I didn't even want to imagine what it was. Since that night, I've never stopped at unknown snack bars on the road, especially when they're almost empty. The memory of those 3 standing at the door, watching me in silence, still gives me goosebumps whenever I pass through similar places. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was the real feeling that I shouldn't be there, that I was an intruder in something that wasn't part of that world. To this day, I don't know if it was some kind of strange joke, or if there was something much more disturbing behind those people. But I know I've never felt so observed in my whole life. And you, would you have the courage to finish your meal in a place where everyone stops what they are doing just to face you? I was at the cashier that quiet dawn, around 4 in the morning, when I heard a roar coming from the kitchen. The sound was so loud that it made me jump out of the chair. It seemed as if several pots had fallen at once. Since there was no one else in the restaurant at that time besides me and the cook, who had already left, my first thought was that someone had entered without me noticing. I went to the kitchen carefully, my heart racing, hoping to find everything turned upside down. But, to my surprise, the pots were in place, none fallen on the floor. The detail that made me even more uncomfortable was realizing that the back door was ajar. I was absolutely sure that I had locked her earlier, as I did every day at the closing. I slowly approached the door, trying to see the parking lot through the gaps. The night was silent, only the noise far from the road. I closed and locked the door again, but the feeling that someone had just passed by didn't leave me alone. I went back to the counter trying to stay calm, but I kept looking back every minute. That's when I heard the noise of an engine accelerating. I ran to the front window and saw an unknown car leaving the parking lot in a hurry. The red lanterns quickly disappeared on the dark road, without me being able to identify the sign. The coincidence of the car leaving right after the noise in the kitchen only made it clear that I was not alone that morning. I stood there at the window, trying to understand what had just happened. There was no logical explanation for the pots to have made that noise if they were all in place. And the car accelerating soon after seemed more than a coincidence. The feeling was that someone had really entered through the back door and ran out when they realized I was there. I spent the rest of the shift on alert, unable to relax. Any small noise, such as the slap of the refrigerator or the noise of the wall clock, made me look around, hoping that something would happen again. The dawn seemed to never pass, and the fear that the car would come back at any moment left me with sweaty hands until dawn. When it finally dawned and other employees began to arrive, I quickly told what had happened. Some believed that it could have been a failed robbery attempt, since the back door was sometimes the target of curious people. But no one could explain the roar of the pots, since they were all stacked properly, with no sign of having fallen. The manager even checked the cameras, but precisely those in the kitchen were turned off for maintenance, which only made everything even stranger. The images of the parking lot also showed nothing but the car leaving at high speed. No face, no sign, just the trail of red headlights disappearing on the road. Since that night, I have never been able to feel safe working alone at dawn. I always check the back door several times, and yet I feel as if at any moment it could open again. The noise of the pots still echoes in my head, as if it had been a warning that I was not as alone as I thought. To this day, I don't know who was in that car, nor what exactly happened in that kitchen. But I know that, since then, every shift at dawn has become heavier for me. And you, would you have the courage to stay in an empty snack bar at 4 in the morning after hearing inexplicable noises and seeing a strange car running away from the parking lot? Working at dawn in a snack bar always brings strange situations, but that night was different from everything I've ever experienced. I was in the kitchen preparing some orders when I noticed, by the reflection of the glass, a man sitting alone on a table in the corner. He hadn't called any attendant, he just stared at the menu. I thought it was weird because, after so long, any customer would have already made at least one simple order. The detail is that he stayed there for almost 40 minutes, motionless, turning the pages of the menu from time to time, but without calling anyone. I decided to leave the kitchen and go to the table, since it was late and the living room was empty. When I got close, the chair was empty. No sign that someone had been there. The menu was closed on the table, as if it had not been touched. At the time, I was confused, because I was absolutely sure that I had seen the man sitting there. I went back to the kitchen trying to convince myself that maybe he had deceived me, but the doubt did not leave my head. So I decided to check the security cameras to get the test. And that's when the situation got even stranger. In the recording, the man was really there, sitting at the corner table, flipping through the menu as I had seen. The most disturbing thing was that he didn't ask for anything, didn't talk to anyone, and just got up and left. But the clock of the footage showed that he had left just 2 minutes before I got to the table. Insufficient time to disappear without me or any of the attendants noticing. I told the waitress that she was on the shift with me, and she swore she hadn't seen anyone leave. The front door had that bell that rang every time someone entered or left, and we didn't hear anything. There were also no cars in the parking lot at that time, which only made the situation even more meaningless. If he really left, how did he manage to do it without being noticed? I looked at the table again and noticed a detail that made me even more nervous. The menu he was leafing through in the video was now closed and aligned with the others, as if it had never been used. There were no marks of a glass, napkin, or any sign that someone had sat there. It was as if the man had never existed outside the recording. I spent the rest of the shift trying to focus on the kitchen, but every time the doorbell swung, my body was alert, waiting to see that man come in again. I couldn't get the image of him sitting still, with the menu open, as if he was just buying time. The silence of the hall seemed even heavier after what I had seen on the cameras. When dawn ended and the sun began to rise, I reviewed the recording once again. The stranger really got up, adjusted the menu and left calmly, but without the door having made any sound. It was as if he had simply crossed the hall and disappeared, without having to open anything to leave. Since then, whenever I see someone sitting alone for a long time without asking for anything, I feel a chill down my spine. That recording proved to me that what I saw was not the result of tiredness, but it also didn't look like something that followed the normal rules. To this day, I wonder who, or what, was really at that table that morning. I've never been able to look at the corner of the snack bar the same way. I even avoid cleaning that table during the night, as if I were waiting to meet him there again. And you, would you have the courage to approach a client who remains silent for almost an hour and simply disappears without leaving a trace? I was covering an extra shift at a diner in the countryside of Kansas, and it was already past 2 in the morning when the counter landline started ringing. At that time, we almost never received calls, so I ran to answer thinking it could be some lost customer on the road. But on the other side of the line, I only heard a heavy, slow breath, which seemed to approach the phone. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to hear a word, but nothing came but that constant breathing. I got goosebumps from head to toe and hung up on the spot. I went back to organizing some things to try to forget the episode, but that's when I realized something even worse. The kitchen phone was off the hook, as if someone had just used it. The problem is that no one had been there all night. I walked to the kitchen with my heart racing, trying to convince myself that maybe some colleague had forgotten the phone like that before leaving. But when I got there, the environment was the same as always, quiet, with the lights off and the utensils organized. I took the phone and put it back in place, but my hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped it. I went back to the counter even more nervous, because I was sure that all the employees had already left hours before. In addition, the kitchen phone was in the back, and I would have heard someone pass by me if I had gone there. The strangest thing was to think that if the device was off the hook, maybe that breath I heard would have come from there. The silence inside the diner became suffocating after that. Every time the wind beat against the windows, I jumped in fright, thinking that the phone was going to ring again. I stared at the counter as if I expected to hear that sound at any moment. I couldn't stop imagining someone standing in the kitchen, breathing on the phone, listening to my every word without ever saying anything. I tried to call the manager to tell him what was happening, but my cell phone had no signal in there. I ended up sitting at one of the tables, staring at the kitchen door, with the feeling that something was going to come out of there at any moment. The clock seemed to run too slowly, and every minute that passed increased the pressure on my chest. Around 3 a.m, I had the courage to check the kitchen once again. I entered slowly, observing every corner, but everything was as before, still silent. But there was one detail that I couldn't ignore. The phone was again off the hook, as if it had been taken off the support on purpose. I knew I had put it back before, and that was proof that I wasn't alone. I almost ran out and went back to the counter, locking the door that separated the front area from the kitchen. It was no use, the feeling that someone was in there only grew. The worst thing is that, even with the door closed, I could swear I heard a slight buzz, as if the phone was hanging, swinging in the air. It was at this point that I decided not to check anything else and just wait for dawn. When the shift finally ended and the sun began to appear through the windows, the other employees arrived, and I found the strength to pretend that everything was normal. But before leaving, I went through the kitchen just to be sure. The phone was in the right place this time, as if nothing had happened. There were no signs that anyone had entered there, and no one reported anything strange in the following nights. To this day, when the phone at the counter rings at dawn, I feel my whole body crash. I never answered again without hesitation, because I'm always afraid of hearing that same heavy breath on the other side. And you, would you have the courage to work alone in a diner in the middle of the night, knowing that the phone can ring at any time without anyone on the line? I worked alone at the snack bar during the night, something common in the Missouri countryside, since the movement was practically zero after midnight. Around 2 a.m, while cleaning the counter, I looked out the window and noticed a car parked at the bottom of the courtyard. The headlights were lit, illuminating part of the land, but no one came out of the inside. At first, I thought it was just someone resting before going on the trip. But time went by, 10 minutes, 20, half an hour, and the car was still exactly in the same place, without any movement. With each passing minute, the feeling that someone was just watching from afar became stronger. I tried to concentrate on work, but I couldn't stop looking in that direction. The parking lot was empty, only that car stopped in the background with the headlights illuminating the darkness. I even thought about going to the front door to see better, but something held me back. The idea that someone could be sitting inside watching me, motionless, paralyzed me. After almost an hour, I decided to call the local police. I explained the situation, and the attendant said he would send a car to check. I was relieved for a few minutes, until I had the courage to look out the window again. To my surprise, the car was no longer there. It disappeared so fast that it seemed impossible not to have heard the engine or seen the lights moving away. I decided to go out the front door and walk to where the car was, trying to find some explanation. The dawn air was stopped, and the silence only made everything more strange. That's when I noticed the tire marks on the gravel floor. They were fresh, very sharp, as if the car had left there a few minutes ago. I followed the trail with my eyes, but it didn't lead to the exit of the parking lot. The marks simply ended right in front of the side door of the snack bar kitchen. I stood still looking at that, not knowing if I would enter again or if he called someone. My heart raced when I imagined that, while I was watching the car from the counter, someone could have come down and approached that door without me noticing. I ran back inside and locked the side door, even though I already knew it was probably locked. Seeing those tire marks ending right there made me panic. I walked from one side to the other trying to hear any noise, such as footsteps or a bang, but everything remained in absolute silence. The only thing that accompanied me was the suffocating feeling that someone had been very close minutes before. When the vehicle finally arrived, I quickly told what I had seen. The police checked the courtyard and confirmed the marks, but said that there was no car nearby and that maybe someone had stopped there to rest. But not even they could explain why the trail did not follow to the exit. It was as if the car had simply disappeared in front of my door. After that dawn, I could never work quietly looking at the parking lot. Whenever I see headlights approaching, my body crashes, waiting for the car to stop at the same point as before. But none stayed as long as that one, nor did it leave marks that ended on the kitchen door. Still, the memory of that scene accompanies me every time I enter the dawn shift. To this day I don't know who was inside that car, nor what I wanted. All I know is that the marks on the floor were real, and they were exactly in front of the door where I went in and out every day. And you, would you have the courage to work alone knowing that someone may have stopped the car in the dark just to observe in silence? Working in a 24-hour snack bar in the middle of the New Mexico desert always brings strange stories, but that night was different from all. Around 2 in the morning, a man entered and sat in one of the corner cabins. He seemed ordinary, he didn't say much, he just asked for a coffee. I wrote down the order and served the cup a few minutes later, as always. I went back to the counter to do other tasks, but when I decided to check the table again, I realized something that made me cold. The cup was exactly in the same place where I left it, full, still releasing steam, but the seat was empty. I looked around, expecting to see him on his way to the cashier or maybe in the bathroom, but there was no one. My first instinct was to look at the entrance door, since it always made that characteristic noise when someone entered or left. But she hadn't opened up once since I served the coffee. The hall was silent, only with the yellowish lights reflecting on the empty tables. I walked to the bathroom, knocked on the door, but it was completely empty. The detail that bothered me the most was realizing that there was no movement recorded at the cashier either. I had direct vision from there and knew that no one had passed by to pay. It was as if the client had simply disappeared, leaving the cup still intact, as if it had never been touched. I went back to the cabin and stared at the cup, trying to find some detail that would give me an explanation. The coffee was still hot, which meant that it had left, or disappeared, a few minutes before. I looked under the table, checked the side corridors, even the kitchen area, but I didn't find anyone. That made me even more uncomfortable, because the place was small and impossible to leave without being seen. I thought about asking the cook if he had noticed the customer, but I realized that he was busy all the time behind the plate and would not have let the movement go. I then returned to the counter, trying to stay calm, but every time I looked at the corner of the hall, I felt a chill when I saw the empty cabin with the cup standing in the same place. The following minutes were of pure tension. I was watching the cabin as if waiting for the man to come back and sit down again, but nothing happened. The cup remained there, untouched, as a silent proof that he was really there. I even walked to the front door and opened it to check the parking lot, but there was no stopped car, just the darkness of the deserted road. When I came back, I noticed something even stranger. The cabin seat seemed slightly marked, as if someone had just gotten up. It was as if his presence had been real until a few seconds before. But how could he have left without the door making noise, or without the cashier registering anything? That was the question that tormented me. I finished my shift without being able to concentrate on anything else. Every time I passed through the cabin, my gaze was drawn to that still full cup, cooling slowly, as if the customer could return at any moment to continue where he left off. But he never came back. When the day dawned, I took the cup to the kitchen with trembling hands, as if carrying a memory that I didn't want to have lived. To this day, whenever I serve someone in that same cabin, I feel a strange chill, as if it were the same man coming back without making any noise. No matter how much I try to forget, the feeling that someone can simply disappear before my eyes has never left me. And you, would you have the courage to serve someone alone at dawn knowing that you may never see him leave again?